So hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. We are going to be sharing about the Taiwan Agroecology delegation, which is a farmer-to-farmer delegation that brought 8 Asian American farmers across the Pacific to the island of Taiwan this past November. And we want to start by thanking some of the sponsors for this trip, one of which was CAF, also Why Hunger, the Sci Fund, and 11th Hour Foundation. So we're going to start with some intros. My name is Lee Schmidt. I'm calling today from Tongva Lands in Los Angeles, California. I'm a Taiwanese American farmer and the founder of Cultural Roots Nursery. The mission of my nursery is to facilitate the healing and connection between folks of the Asian diaspora and our foodways by growing culturally relevant plants and seeds and also supporting communities in learning how to grow their own food. I also work for UC Cooperative Extension as a food systems advisor serving LA County and Ventura County. And I'll pass it to Kellee.
Hi everyone, my name is Kellee Matsushita-Tseng. I was born and raised in California. I am third generation Chinese and Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese. I farm and grow seeds on unceded territory of the Awaswas speaking Ayupi tribe, which is currently stewarded by the Ama Mutsun tribal band. It's the area currently known to some as the Pajaro Valley in Watsonville. I also am the Farm and Land Stewardship Manager at Food What, so I get to farm with high school youth, and I have been working with second generation seeds, doing community programming and seed trials. I'll pass it to Scott.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Chang-Fleeman. I work with Kristen Leach as one of the collaborators with Second Generation Seeds, as well as with Kellee in Sebastopol. I also work at the Berkeley Food Institute, which is an interdisciplinary food and farming research institute housed at UC Berkeley. And I'm a consultant with Kitchen Table Advisors on a land access project right now in Marin County as well. I used to own a farm called Shaoshan Farm, which was a small scale certified organic Asian vegetable farm in the Bay Area, growing produce for direct markets for San Francisco Bay Area. I'm also going to introduce our other co-organizer for the Taiwan Agroecology delegation trip, Kimberly Cho Sunan, who is not on the call today. But Kim is one of the other co-organizers of this project, and also is works with FIG NYC, which is a food systems and community building organization in New York City. And I'm going to pass it over to Kellee now to kick us off with some historical context and just context of Asian Americans in U.S. agriculture. That was kind of the foundation that this work was built in.
As we know, there have been many generations of Asian farmers whose skills and knowledge have literally shaped the landscape of California and have been the backbone of the farming economy and food system in California for generations. These farmers contributed enormously to building the wealth of California, which is currently the fifth biggest economy in the world, with agriculture being a huge part of that. Many immigrants were hired as laborers were seasoned farmers and technicians from highly skilled agricultural communities. For example, Chinese immigrants, many from the Pearl River Delta, were instrumental to establishing the levee and flood control systems in the Sacramento River Delta. Chinese irrigation knowledge allowed fruit and vegetable cultivation for the first time in California in that way, as well as the introduction of crops like olives to the Central Valley and wine grapes to Sonoma and Napa. Additionally, construction of the railroad by Chinese immigrants linked West Coast fruit and vegetable farms to the East Coast, which allowed for transcontinental produce deliveries for the first time. Like countless others, my great-grandparents were part of the prolific Japanese farming community before the war. At that time, Japanese farmers grew about 40% of the produce in California, including 100% of the strawberry, celery, and pepper industry production, and were also contributing immensely to the nursery and cut flower industries. Japanese farmers shaped the entire landscape of the West Coast, often farming land that white settlers deemed unfarmable. At that time, because the Philippines was actually a U.S. territory, Filipinos were exempt from immigration restrictions. So in the 1920s and 1930s, over 100,000 men would come to the U.S. seeking employment. Farmers from the Philippines were another large wave of Asian immigrants to California, with Filipino farmers forming the AWOC, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, and building a massive farm worker movement. These are just a few examples of the so many contributions from the vast and diverse Asian farmer community. However, since the arrival of Europeans on Western soil, we know there's been a political and economic project in motion in the United States to remove and keep land from communities of color. From the genocide of indigenous peoples to the discrimination by the USDA that caused Black land loss in the South, we see this pattern continued against Asian farming communities throughout history. Just some of these vicious examples include various exclusion acts and land law acts, which made it illegal for Asians to own land in California or immigrate, or even exist in particular cities. For example, the city of Santa Cruz in 1886, deeming it illegal for Chinese people to even exist within city limits. There were many unions that were anti-Japanese, and it was actually ag groups that lobbied for many of the limitation laws for Japanese. This fed deeply into the anti-Asian West Coast sentiment. More recently was the Executive Order 9066, which was one of the most massive land grabs in history, displacing and disowning hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans, many of whom are farmers, from their land, including my great-grandparents. Next slide, please. According to the most recent USDA Ag Census, California is currently the state within the US with the highest amount of Asian producers, with Asian farmers accounting for 5% of the producers. The population of the Asian community is currently estimated to be 15 to 18% of California, although this does not include people who identify from North or West Asia, with the complexity and difficulty of how the US census defines who is Asian. As we know, it is a very diverse group in a very diverse state. Generally, though, Asian farmers tend to be younger, have smaller acreage of operations, and also be much more likely to grow specialty rather than commodity crops. Because of the lack of complexity in the USDA census, I also wanted to show on the bottom left the young farmers survey to show the broader landscape of who may identify as an Asian producer. In the same survey, the majority of Asian farmers also identified as growing culturally important crops. And in the same survey, more than 20% of Asian farmers also specifically named racial discrimination, making it very challenging to farm, or extremely challenging to farm, as seen in the bottom right image. So there are still both pervasive and subtle issues that persist in agricultural spaces related to racism. Some of these issues include lack of mentorship for Asian farmers, lack of culturally accurate or relevant resources or training, difficult or no access to traditional or contemporary varieties of Asian crops that are significant to many of our communities, prolific hybridization, breeding, and commodification of Asian vegetables, resulting in the loss of seed sovereignty for farmers, especially in the brassica family. And while there is increasing interest and exposure to Asian culture and food, with Asian foodways somehow being now viewed as healthy and desirable, there is also continued and recently increased xenophobia and hate against Asian immigrants and the Asian American community, as we know, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, with Asian immigrants continuing to be scapegoated during times of economic crisis. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Kellee, for laying out that history and context. And I feel like it just does a really good job of kind of like setting the stage for my own journey as a farmer. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about like the background of like how this delegation came to be. And so 2023 was the first time I traveled back to Taiwan as a farmer. And it was a very formative experience for me. This is already after I had been farming for 6 years. And I want to thank Scott for kind of creating the catalyst for that trip because he was traveling around Taiwan at that time, and it kind of like motivated me to seize the moment and like take that trip. And it was like right before the growing season, which is perfect timing. And so we kind of like started talking about, hey, could we try to like meet up and see if we can meet some farmers and experience Taiwanese agriculture. And I think, like Kellee mentioned, during like my time as a farmer, I've had really been searching for like not only a deeper understanding of Taiwanese foodways, and just like, wanting to learn more about, varieties and like, different types of plants, but also I really had like a deep desire to look for that mentorship, in a Taiwanese farmer. So, it was pretty challenging to figure out how to make that first connection point in Taiwan. My family members didn't know any farmers, so I kind of emailed everyone I knew in the food world in California to see if they knew a farmer or a farm in Taiwan. And I ended up with one contact. And so this photo on the left is Scott and I visiting that farm. Um, it's run by a couple. In Tainan, which is on the west coast of Taiwan. And that photo is the first time that both of us were able to like touch the soil and like have the experience of working on a farm in Asia. And that 2 week trip that we took was like so formative for me that I actually ended up moving to Taiwan the following year. And I lived there for 4 months. And so during that time, I lived with Peiru Ko, who's in the right photo. She's a Taiwanese food writer with some ties to the Bay Area. And through her, I was able to like meet even more farmers during that 4 month period, and actually like go out to the farm as these photos demonstrate. Um, I visited, nurseries and diversified organic small farms. And I think some of my main takeaways during those two trips was really being blown away by like the biodiversity of vegetable and herb varieties. Like for instance, I've been growing this white Taiwanese bitter melon, but when I was in Taiwan, I like visited this bitter melon nursery and they were like, "Oh, we grow 30 varieties." And I was like, my mind was just like absolutely blown. And so I think that's like one example of just the way that that like biodiversity, he's talking about like how certain varieties are better for soup and certain varieties like they use in different ways. And so kind of like understanding more how that biodiversity was embedded in the cuisine and like cultural and spiritual practices. But I was also left with, um, like a desire to learn more about how small farmers in Taiwan were making their livings and like how were they also kind of coming up against some of the similar challenges that we face, like with climate change, thinking about food sovereignty and regenerative farming. And so after meeting Kim, who's an amazing community organizer and land worker based in New York, we started working on the concept of what it would look like to bring other Asian American farmers and land workers to Taiwan. And so I think like some of the major goals of this project was to create a shared experience with Asian American farmers to learn directly from Taiwanese farmers. So to get that kind of like farmer to farmer connection and mentorship that I kind of experienced during that 4 month trip. And then also to kind of strengthen like our collective knowledge and practices around stewarding our foodways. And so the concept for the first the week-long pilot was to create this cultural exchange and solidarity building, to have agroecology skill sharing, explorations of food politics and history, and then also to like be able to experience the like ancestral and earth-based healing through immersive urban rural farm visits and workshops. And so just to share a bit about the delegates who came on the trip. we had four delegates from California and four from New York. So the three of us here on this presentation, plus Kanoa Dinwoody from Feral Heart Farm, were the California delegates. And then we had Kim, Salt, and Kaya, who are the farmers at Gentle Time Farm, and Christina from Troy Division. And the three New York farmers, Salt, Kaya, and Christina, they're a part of Troy Commons, which is a cooperative of Asian-led farms engaging their communities and building food sovereignty in the Northeast. So they have a shared CSA box that they all contribute to. And so, yeah, so I just to, I guess, bring us to the trip. So we were able to raise funds to carry out this vision, which was like really amazing. And so, um, yeah, just to set a little bit of context of Taiwan and like the agriculture there. You can see the image on the left side of this map shows Taiwan's agricultural land. So it's mapping like paddy fields, dryland farming, orchards, livestock, poultry, and pasture. You can see it's like pretty concentrated on the west side of the island. And then the other map on the right is showing the forest land in Taiwan, which really coincides with I think like the mountain ranges. It's an extremely mountainous island. I think about like 70 to 80% of the island is mountain ranges. And then, so Taiwan, there are 16 indigenous tribes who have been there since time immemorial. And then starting in the 1600s, Taiwan was colonized successively by the Dutch, the Spanish, the Chinese, and then the Japanese, which really shaped food and agriculture on the island. I also want to share just a little bit about like the more of the like land context in Taiwan. So according to some sources, about 3% of the island is farmed organically. Um, in 2024, approximately 25%, so a quarter of Taiwan's total food imports came from the US. And when we were there, this past trip, we were learning about soy and how most of the soy that's consumed in Taiwan is actually from the US, which is something that I didn't know before. And Taiwan also is comprised of a lot of small farms. So I did find a source that was saying that the average size of a farm in Taiwan is 1.1 hectares, 2.7 acres. I think this kind of like corroborates like some of the experiences that Scott and I have had on the island of just like seeing a lot of smallholder farms. And I think that because of this small farm size, like the rest of the food system in Taiwan is kind of like built around this like smaller scale agriculture. So I'm going to pass it to Scott, and he's going to bring us into our trip now.
Thanks, Lee. So the first half of our trip was really spent in Elon County, which you can see this map here. Elon County is on in the northeast kind of corner of the island and is just outside of Taipei. So it's like one of the rural areas that's closest to the big city. Elon is incredibly wet and rainy. They get hit with basically every typhoon that comes through. They receive 118 inches of rain a year on average. And the farmers we were talking to said that 118 inches of rain a year, historically, it rains like 200 out of 365 days a year. But now, with climate change, they still receive 118 inches of rain a year, but in about a 100-day window now. So same amount of rain, just in much heavier downfall periods and much more severe typhoons, which we'll talk a little bit about what that means for agriculture in the area. So when we were in Elon, we traveled around and were taught by our farmer teacher host there, a farmer named Lai Ching Song. He's a friendly farmer in Taiwan. There's different categorizations. There's not just certified organic. There's like friendly farming is a category, and then certified organic is kind of the next level. So a lot of farmers choose to be friendly farmers, which is for small farmers a lot easier level of certification than going through an entire certification process. So he's a friendly rice farmer who direct markets his rice through his grain holder club, so CSA. Um, and he, beyond being a farmer, has really done this amazing job of building this community out there and encouraging people to move from Taipei, from the cities, back out to the rural areas. Like a lot of places in the US, Taiwan, their rural communities are facing a lot of like rural decline, younger people, younger generations moving to the city for higher paying jobs. And he's really trying to encourage folks to come back out through both farmer training, but really more so from a holistic kind of community development side. So creating a community that people want to live in will keep farmers there longer than just training people and not having the kind of networks that really lead to fulfilling lives in that area. So to give a better background, we're going to play a video about Chingsong and about Shungu Village, the community that he has um, really helped create and steward.
在都市里头开始工作之后，哇，每一天光是上下班车程就要2个小时，甚至超过。我觉得每天陷在那个车阵当中，一直在想，人生特别是青春的时光，真的就是这样子浪费在这种事情上面吗？股东俱乐部算是一个冒险，也是一个实验的。对，一直讲，这应该是日本式的做法，一般都要像这样，要你这样子弄，它大概就不会掉。开办股东俱乐部的时候，我应该是34岁。高炸看报抓锤看鬼，这个差不多没这样够往他了啊。我在大学毕业之后，将近10年，突然幡然醒悟，考了奖学金去日本念研究所，回来之后居然是跑到宜兰，真正开始种田。那我想压力当然是存在的，包括我父亲啊、我母亲都不能谅解。但是我也确实在之前做了很多我觉得我可能会有兴趣的工作，可是换来换去，我始终没有找到。就是说，你没有找到自己的最爱，你觉得我可以干，可是好像少一点什么。好，你先走上面。好，上面这里没有很多。这一批年轻人应该都是从都市啦，或者是说各行各业，原来都不是务农的，算是这2、3年我田里面帮忙的最大的主力。像启轩他家里住在巴黎，居然跑来这边帮忙我们下田除草。你今年割怎样？
奋斗
不错啦，还有割那么多。他刚开始来的时候是自称农村美劳工了，就专门帮人家做包装、做文创了。不知道为什么就开始连稻米也开始种，一不小心还拿到深沟村插秧的冠军。老农夫说：你这个插秧一天可以插完1分地，哇，这个厉害
2天啦。
！2天。其实很多人是心里有田园梦，希望也能够回到乡村，但是大家都知道这个很难。那后来陆陆续续也有人开始提议说，那他如果想要当农夫，是不是有机会？其实我想到的方法也是最简单的办法，就是怎么样把我的信用度再转嫁出去，帮这些新手农夫租田地，让他们能够开始有第一个起点，很快的就这样子的人数就慢慢增加。休息一下，我们先上来吃点心了。
技术上当然我们就说，轻松割稻子了，我们来割稻子了；轻松插秧了，我们来插秧了。其实，技术因为轻松在这边友善耕作从事了，那时候就大概已经10年了，他已经证明友善耕作的稻子是可行的而且怎么销售，他都已经很稳定了，所以我们只要 follow 他的脚步就可以。
乡下人其实忙的时候非常忙，几乎大家都需要人手帮忙。一群人开始换工下田，但是空闲的时候也非常闲，几乎大家都需要人聊天。我觉得有一点点把过去 老农村的那个庙口文化找回来。像现在开始有一群年轻人在这里交换各种 idea，然后彼此激荡想法、办活动，所有天马行空的东西在这边都会有人回应。哎，我们一起来用什么方式来处理福寿螺？我们一起来观察鸟类它怎么行动，甚至我们一起来发明一个什么工具可以怎么使用。
OK。有一天，小牛家里在睡午觉时，梦见自己正在吃新薯的米粉。
有人开办农村电台，有人开始做农村测候站，小小的气象的预告，然后销售在地的农产品，开始做宅配送的一些服务。
我们跟台湾农业没有直接关系，我们产值太低了，那什么是他们做不到的？那是我们在做。比如说，我们在这过得非常愉快的生活，做出一些很有趣的事情，应该会让城市人看得非常的羡慕嘛。那这个就是我们在具体化农村的重要性，重新被主流社会看见。那这个时候，年轻人才看见，我们的农村才有未来。
但是这个是当时完全没有想到的，我从来没有想到一个农夫可以出国到香港去开国际会议，到北京去演讲，到海南岛，甚至到日本去，只是说你回乡种田的故事，不可思议，这超乎想象，但是它发生了，所以我才感觉到说，除非你想不出来你想做什么，如果你有想做的事情，其实应该不惜代价去做。如果你人生放对位置，即使是拿起锄头干农夫，其实你都会发亮的。别人怎么想不是重点，但是你必须要真诚面对你的内心，那是最重要的。
All right, hopefully that buffering wasn't so terrible. The classic trying to play a video in a PowerPoint presentation. Uh, Always so challenging. Um, Great, glad that it worked. But yeah, when we were in Elon, we can go to the next slide, Lee. Basically, Ching Song toured us around all these different places, different farms, different businesses, soy sauce makers, cafes that were purchasing a lot of local products, small rice wine producers. We basically went on this whirlwind tour of meeting all of these people. And then at the end of the day, he showed us that video, and we were like, because we were just like, Lee had a relationship with Ching Song, but the rest of us had never met him before. And we were like, who is this guy that's just been kind of like touring us around for these last 2 days? And at the end, we are like, oh, you're the guy who like brought everyone here and like made this whole thing, which was amazing. And also, maybe pedagogically, we were like, you should have shown us this video first, so we knew like what we were in. So we wanted to share that video with you to kind of ground all these other places that we went, like what the community really looks like. So some of the places that we went in Elon include this is a farmer, Wu Daga. Daga just means big brother. It's like a term of endearment. And respect to one of the more senior farmers in the area. Wu Daga and his family have been farming in Elon for generations, growing rice, but also growing this heirloom landrace variety of black soybean. That's just called Elon, old Elon black soybean is the variety name. And the amazing thing about this landrace black soybean variety is that, as I mentioned, Elon is an incredibly wet, incredibly rainy, typhoon-prone region. But this soybean has been adapted to grow in that region and is basically the only variety of soybean that can grow in conditions that are that wet. We visited his soy sauce and soy milk factory that he has, and his farm, and that's the photo on the left there. And then on the right, we also visited his rice cleaning and milling and packaging facility. And he's a small farmer. As Lee mentioned, organic farming, similar to the US, is still not the mainstream there. But in terms of the small farmers, he's one of the larger, more established ones in the area. So he'll purchase a lot of, organic inputs and amendments, packaging, things like that at cost, and then resell them at cost to smaller farmers so that they can get a bulk discount on things. Then he also acts as um, the packaging facility basically for a lot of small farmers to be able to create products that they can put their own label on and direct market for higher value. Go to the next slide. Some of the other places we went, in Elon, the top left there is Christina in a lotus field. Um, we went to a plant nursery that grows a lot of the starts for both home gardeners as well as a lot of the vegetable farmers. From what we saw, at least a lot of the folks who grow vegetables typically don't have their own greenhouses. You purchase in flats is a lot more common. In the middle there is Zheng Laoshi, who's one of the teachers at the local schools. So one of the other things that this group has done, and Qingzong and his group, they also started a childhood education program at the local schools to continue teaching agriculture to the next generation in Elon. And he's teaching us there how to harvest this my new favorite vegetable, which is water bamboo, which is a crop that is related to rice, and similar to like wheat lakoche on corn. This rice relative gets infected with a smut fungus, which engorges the stem, and that's the part that is eaten. It tastes kind of like I thought it tastes kind of like it's like buttered sweet corn and chestnut, kind of is how I would describe it. Um, and that photo of the delicious food there is from Ching Song's and his wife's cafe as well. So in addition to being rice farmers, they own a cafe where they sell a lot of local products, and they make food with local ingredients. And then on the top right there is some rice wine. And this is a kind of newer initiative there, that some of the members of Shungu Village are trying to start and popularize, kind of like craft rice wine, as a means of increasing tourism and revenue and having another market outlet for rice. Um, yeah, go to the next slide.
All right. So after we went to Yulon, we traveled down the west coast. You can see the map there to Hualien County. And specifically, we went to Guangfu Township, which some of you may have seen in the news was severely impacted by Typhoon Regasa. Um, a barrier lake had formed in the mountains and then flooded and burst through a levee, and then the flood just devastated the entire town. 17 people were killed, and many farmers and businesses and homes were also kind of like covered in the mud. You can kind of see in that photo next to the map. And so the first morning that we were in Hualien, we visited one of the largest organic farms in the area, which was an indigenous-led Amis farm. And their main field, you can see us in that photo, it's probably about like 4 to 6 acres, was entirely covered in like a six feet of this like dense clay from the flood waters. So they lost all their crops, and then they had just started to do a community remediation project. And so in this photo, we're kind of like double digging through the clay and adding, organic straw matter. And then we planted a red Taiwanese quinoa that's known for its strong roots. And so they were hoping that, by planting this quinoa, they would be able to kind of like help remediate the soil and restore their field. And you can see the photo next to it is one of the quinoa that we planted sprouting, which is, I think, very hopeful. They sent us that photo a couple weeks later. And so, yeah, so we spent the morning working on this farm. And then in the afternoon, we went to visit Kachunjie. So Kejie means older sister. She's a well-known Amis farmer whose farm is called Mapulang Farm, which means is the Amis word for together. And so she's working on a project to revitalize Amish varieties of millet, and is pretty well known around Taiwan for this project. There was like just a mini documentary that came out about her farm. But the millet varieties, you can see us in that photo in the bottom left, holding some of her millet seeds. But millet is used for eating, but also for making wine and in ceremonies. And so we weren't able to visit her millet farm because of the flooding, but we did go to this soybean farm. So you can see us in the field there. We did some like weeding on a 2 acre plot of soybeans with this really cool tool that she she gave us. And I think and so after the weeding, we visited her Dalawan, so that the structure that's there on the right, which is an Amish cultural gathering place for eating and sharing stories, and was unfortunately damaged in the typhoon. And I think this was like a really good example, though, of the solidarity building and reciprocity that we really tried to cultivate in this trip. Our co-organizer, Kim, was able to raise additional funds that she donated to Kajia to help make repairs on the Dalawan. And she, I would say, like, speaking for myself, like, she's a very inspiring farmer to visit. I think just to like hear her talk about like how to keep going, like in the face of like climate disaster and like be resilient, like her plants. She also does a lot of education in the community, and like she has 3 kids, and she's like, all 3 of my kids are going into farming, and was just like very proud of that fact. And I think something like inspiring that I kind of like left that trip with was that basically, like, no matter what happens every year, you have to keep planting and you have to keep going. And I think that kind of just like really stuck with me, just like seeing how the flood had really like devastated her community and fields. And I think just yeah, wanted to share that like piece of motivation to all the small farmers out there. Keep planting and keep going. Um, Now I'm gonna pass it to Kellee, and we're gonna go through kind of like some of our reflections from the trip.
For me, participating in this delegation was an incredibly rich experience in so many ways. There's so many learnings, both big and small, that I came away with. And I know some elements of the trip that I'm still processing as well. But I wanted to speak to a couple of items that really stuck with me. Um, Firstly, it was really impactful to witness the impacts of globalization on a farming community and farming communities in a different geography, and to have the opportunity to explore how Taiwanese farmers and communities respond to the threats that globalization imposes on their farming and food systems. I feel like the trip really sharpened my knowledge of uh, the impacts of neoliberalism on food systems as a whole. And uh, while many of the strategies that we witnessed in the farmer communities we visited had similar ideas to some of the strategies we might employ ourselves in topics such as how farmers market and differentiate their products from industrial food products, how they build and sustain farmer networks, how young people are being brought into agriculture, and how to sustain rural communities in farming areas, and how farmers connect their work in agriculture to others who are not farmers themselves to understand the importance of their work. I think it was really important for us to experience these practices in a new context in order for us to be able to imagine new possibilities for our own work and context. It was incredibly meaningful as well to have an opportunity to have deep, sustained exchange and knowledge sharing with peers that I rarely get to connect with, or some I've only met online. It's really inspiring and hopeful and life-giving to be able to share space with those that share similar values and do similar work as you. And we spoke a little bit to this earlier, but it's extremely rare to find spaces that are culturally relevant, appropriately scaled, and values aligned that we can connect to our peers in, often unless we create them ourselves. Next slide, please. For me, it was really important to visit farmers that were also working on the preservation of culture in addition to the production of food. In the upper left corner, there's a photograph of the traditional millet that farmer Kaja had grown that had actually survived the typhoon because it was hung up on this ladder. So as we were there, one of the things that I came away with was being strongly reminded of the significance of climate adapted and regionally specific crop varieties, as the case with the black Elan soybean, that it tolerated the extremely wet conditions, or the indigenous millet grown in Hualien. As a seed farmer, it made me really curious if there are ways that we can continue to further uplift and support the work of those in Taiwan that are growing traditional seeds. And I became really intrigued with the idea of what it means to preserve culture and how that can look. As you can see in the bottom left corner, there's the traditional Amis Delawan structure that Kaja had built with her village elders right next to her John Deere. And I love this image because it really made me think about what it means to utilize contemporary technologies in order to further our work of cultural preservation. Farmer Kaja shared a quote that our culture comes out of the ground. And it was really moving to meet with other farmers across the world and to feel in them the same deep desire to preserve and connect to their culture and community through land, even if we spoke very different languages and came from very different places. And then the other piece of this trip that was really impactful for me was witnessing the flood damage in Hualien from the typhoon. The top image and the right top image shows the sticky rice fields of the Amis farm in Hualien that we went to that was filled with mud and debris, which severely stunted the rice crop. What stuck with me most was how much this mirrored in particular ways the experience of the Pajaro Valley community during 2023. As many folks know, due to environmental racism, in 2023, the Pajaro River Valley levee broke in a large rain event, causing extensive flooding of the entire city and all the surrounding farmland. As residents and farmers were pretty much left to fend for themselves and were primarily supported through community mutual aid response. In Hualien, people spoke to the fact that people jumped on the train all across Taiwan and brought their shovels to help after the flood, while the government responded too little and too late. This brought, for me, a lot of questions about how farmers and communities can continue to build networks of resilience in the face of government neglect so that we can better withstand and recover from climate impacts that will only continue to worsen. And I'll pass it back.
So we also we asked our farm hosts to share with us anything that they wanted to share with you all at this conference. So I'm going to share some takeaways from Ching Song and from Kajie. So Ching Song says that despite the cold, damp rain that fell on the lotus root field the next day, everyone bravely jumped into the paddy field and had a great time playing on the land of their ancestors. This was beyond my expectations, and I deeply felt everyone's strong desire to be with the land and their heartfelt love for farming. I appreciated how everyone prepared a thoughtful small gift for each teacher. Although our language communication was not always smooth, I could feel the warmth in everyone's eyes. I was very happy to have the opportunity to sing with everyone before saying goodbye. This is a wonderful memory for me. And Ching Song is talking about his love of John Denver's song Country Roads, which he sang with us before he left, um, which was really funny, and really sweet. Um, and also these are Google translated from a line chat that we have, so if the wording is a little bit weird. Kajia said, I deeply feel that all farmers in the world share a similar affection for the land. People obtain beauty and nourishment from the land, and today's farmers are willing to give back and replenish the earth's bounty, minimizing interference and giving it respite. Not overdoing it, only doing what can be done in the present moment. This is truly commendable. I believe that the God of nature can heal everything. Every corner displays different vitality, enough for us to experience and marvel at the wonder of all life. Your visit has given me a deeper understanding of the international landscape. I realize that there are farmers in the world who resonate with me, caring about feelings, about effort, and about the next cycle of life on Earth. I'm very moved and proud. And I think both of these quotes really speak to one of the great takeaways from this trip, which is that every farmer that we visited pretty much said, you guys flew all the way from the United States and you came here. Like they were like, why are you here? This is crazy. But it's so energizing for all of us who work in this field of, alternative agriculture that we're up against climate change, industrial, neoliberalism, and so many challenges that there was so much joy and kind of like I don't know, comfort in our hosts realizing, oh my God, there's people on the other side of the world who are doing something similar to me. Like I'm not crazy. Like, and they can come here and see what we're doing and understand like why I do this every single day. And I think that sort of like solidarity and just real human connection and community building across language and across the ocean is, yeah, so powerful and motivating for me in my work. And it seems like as well for the folks that we visited. Go to the next slide.
Oh, you took what I was going to say, Scott.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, building off of that, I think so. It's Scott, Kim, and I were the three main organizers of this delegation, and I think for me, I feel like this was the first time where I was like helping to create a movement towards agroecology practice. I mean, I think, we have our obviously like our networks here in the US, but to really like connect that abroad and like be like, hey, this is like a movement. This is we're all connected in what we do. And like we not only have this agricultural practice of trying to practice, reciprocity with the natural world, but also we wanted to like have this intentional community building across the ocean. And I think one of the ways that or like approach that we took is this moving at the speed of trust. And this is something that I learned from one of my mentors, Dr. Caroline Collins, who I've done a lot of like community building work with, and it's all about how when you build relationships with others, you need to move at the speed in which you can like build that trust. And so we're now like in the third year of building our relationships with farmers in Taiwan. And while it is challenging, like being in two different places, like not having a language in common, I truly believe that it's like worth it to keep these relationships alive and strong, and because it helps like our communities on both sides of the Pacific. And so I think, yeah, I just wanted to impart that as an organizer and for those who like may in the future like want to try to organize something like this, that I do think that relationship building and taking that slow approach, even though, this pilot trip, I think there are a lot of things that we're like, oh, we wish we could have maybe gone deeper in this one area, but it was like the first time that Ching Song and Kajia were meeting us really and like spending time. So I can only hope that like over time this will get like better and deeper.
Yeah, as Lee mentioned, I think a lot of these reflections we want to share are hopefully maybe, yeah, reflections we can share to people who may also feel inspired to organize similar agroecology delegations, either internationally or within the US, or bringing folks to the US for your own communities or um, affinities. And one other thing with that moving at the speed of trust is, this was a pilot. This is the first time that we did a trip like this, um, and bringing people also who we all have worked with in some capacity. A lot of one of the great outcomes of this too was like building community and building movement building amongst the delegates too. It was the first time that a lot of the East Coast people had met the West Coast people, and even within the West Coast, um, we don't get to see each other that often. So there was a lot of great learning, like peer to peer. And yeah, wanting to bring folks with us for the pilot, at least, who could give us really honest feedback on like what is this experience like, what's working, what's not working, things like that. And I'll share a couple other reflections that I have just as an organizer of this. It was amazing to see the excitement and the positive reception to this after we launched and announced that we were doing this. It kind of started as just like, okay, well, there's some money we could, help offset the price of some flights for people to come. If people want to come do this with us, we can like connect with people. And then as we announced it and tried to, fundraise to be able to pay our farmer hosts more, to be able to pay stipends to the farmers who had to take time off of work, there was just so much positive reception and people saying, "Oh my God, like I would love to do something like this," or "This is so exciting. I would love to support something like this." And that was really exciting. Um, that being said, it was also so much more work, money, and time than we anticipated as organizers. So I think if you are planning on or interested in doing something similar, just really thinking through the whole process and what that looks like, and yeah, be realistic about like what we can achieve in organizing a trip like this. And then I think one of my big reflections was really, as somebody who works in seed sovereignty, yeah, just always like reverence for the seed stewards around the world. And I wanted to include this photo of one of the farm managers from Pongka Farm, the Ami's farm in Hualien, holding this bunch of glutinous rice. So they had been looking for this specific variety of red glutinous rice that can be dry farmed. So not, it can actually be farmed without paddy style agriculture. Um, and this is a traditional Ami's variety that had been kind of lost. And they found some elders who had some seed, grew it out, duplicated the seed, grew it out again, and basically over 5 years had increased their seed lot from one bunch of this rice seed to about 5 hectare planting. And they opened up and sold CSA shares for members of their community to buy the first harvest of this rice. And then the barrier lake broke, flooded their field, and also flooded their seed storage room. And she's holding the last bunch of rice that didn't get wet and damaged from the flooding. So she was saying that essentially they're starting back over after 5 years with another just single bunch of rice. Um, so both the importance of, creating community level seed networks, but also that, this type of dry farmed rice under different climate extremes could be incredibly important. And similarly, the beans that Wudaga grows in Elon, they also got hit with a similar typhoon and were still able to receive a harvest off of it. And not only that, but because that landrace variety is able to produce so well under such weather extremes, they were actually able to lobby the Taiwanese government to grant soybean subsidies to farmers in Elon County who previously were excluded from the subsidy program because the government said, "Oh, you can't grow soybeans here. This climate isn't suited for soybeans." And they said, "Well, we grow this heirloom variety that actually can." Showed the government that they could, and then now those farmers are actually able to grow it and receive a subsidy, which is really important to farmers' livelihood there. Um, and also really important to food sovereignty on the island. As Lee mentioned, most of the soybeans are GMO soybeans that are imported from the United States. So the government really is actually very excited about being able to support small scale bean producers wherever they can grow. So yeah, next steps before we go into questions. We were able to actually film a few of the days that we were there. so we're working with a director in Taiwan right now, Idao, who is in the editing phase of a short film that we'll release. There's going to be a New York, a shareback, an in-person shareback session in New York later this year. Lee and Kim did an event with UC Berkeley as well, which they forgot to hit record on the Zoom recording, so they're actually going to record a podcast now with a similar delegation from who went to the Philippines. And so that yeah, that'll come out later this year. We're starting the fundraising and planning phases already for our next 3 years that we're planning on hosting programming. So including future delegation trips to Taiwan, as well as also bringing our Taiwanese farmer hosts to the U.S. To host them on our farms and have some sort of exchange like that. We also want to publish some guides and resources, taking the learnings that we gathered from organizing an international agroecology delegation so that we can hopefully, you guys can learn from our mistakes and be able to organize something more similarly with maybe less of having to figure stuff out. And if you want to hear more about, as the documentary comes out and we have these different share back opportunities, you can follow us on Instagram at Taiwan Food and Farm Tour. You can donate there to our 501(c)(3) fiscal sponsor. If you're based on the East Coast at all, highly recommend checking out Choi Commons and supporting them. They do amazing work as both a farmer cooperative, distribution and CSA cooperative, as well as doing a lot of mutual aid work, feeding elders in particular in Queens and Chinatown. And if you're in New York and you want to buy some of the products from the farmers that we visited, the store Yunhai in Brooklyn sells rice from Chingsong, which is pretty cool. All right. And I think we can turn it over to questions now. And we have some in the chat that I can read out. And if you have some, please drop in the chat. So Lydia's wondering if we saw much evidence of cover cropping. If so, what cover crops were used?
I would say I mean, what's kind of difficult is like only visiting during certain times of year. So I would say like I personally have not seen cover cropping, and I know with like the rice fields, I mean, it depends on like the crop that you're growing, but with the rice fields, people leave them fallow over the winter, but still like flooded. Um, I don't know, Scott, do you remember seeing cover crop?
The time that we were there was kind of like right after harvest, but yeah, like Lee was saying, most of the farms don't cover crop the rice fields. Some of them do, and some of the bean farms cover crop with I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a type of pigeon pea that they seed as a cover crop. Um, Mostly they were talking about uh, returning like the soy. They make like soil amendments with soy meal and rice husks, like all the processing byproducts. Get then returned to the fields as organic matter. Oh, Kelly, maybe you remember more. Okay, Lydia's also wondering what the name of the traditional millet was. Um, well, okay, so I would just say in general, one of the interesting things in Taiwan is, um, and from my experience, also other parts of Asia, there's not the same like naming conventions as like the United States. Like varieties don't have like names as often. Some do, but it'll be like the Elon black bean. It's like very literal names, um, and most crops are called like, you know, bean number 4, bean number 5, bean number 6. Like, and people will be like, oh, or like sweet potato number. What's the sweet potato number?
Yeah, 47.
Sweet potato 47. So like, but it's funny because people will be very excited about their specific number. So there's this like really, really good sweet potato that all the 7-Elevens and Family Marts sell. It's like a delicious sweet potato. And people are like, oh my God, sweet potato 7 is so good. Like as if they're talking about like, oh my God, I love whatever, like roseanne lettuce. Um, so yeah, I don't know if either of you got any like specific names from the millet from Kojia.
I just know that there were a lot of varieties that she was trying to work with, like maybe like around 15 or so. And I don't know the Amis name either. Kellee, did you remember that? No. Okay.
Yeah, because even
Look it
the red glutinous rice, they're like it's just called red glutinous rice. Like was the variety name. Mary is wondering about the difference between friendly and organic farming. Do you think it's easier to get certification options? Could be a good concept for the US too. Um,
That's something we would like to research more. I feel like there's so much information about like the way that agriculture is running, like even like policies that we learned about when we were there. But I think one of the major challenges has been the language barrier as well. Just like being able to just talk to people. So we did hire an interpreter to travel with us. But then, getting to have those conversations or like reading government documents and that sort of thing is like we've found it challenging. And so like can you read something in English that gives you like an overview of like Taiwanese policies and like that sort of thing about agriculture? Like we haven't been able to really find those resources. So I think that's something we've also been talking about as like in other phases of this project. Can we like either find scholars or farmers in Taiwan to like do a little bit more writing that we can then translate to gain a greater understanding?
yeah, and one of the big distinctions with the friendly farming too, the reason why organic is not as popular is um, you cannot get certified organic in Taiwan unless you either own the land or have a paper lease. And most of the farmers who lease land don't have lease agreements. And the reason why is because there was, well, one of the reasons why, which, depending on what you think about land reform, maybe good or bad, but Taiwan had a series of land reform policies. So primarily, there was a big land redistribution from landowners to farmers. Basically, the government redistributed land to, if you had to the people who were actually farming land who didn't own it, the government gave them the land and took it from landowners, confiscated the land and said, if you're not farming it, you don't get to own this land. Now that policy doesn't exist anymore, but a lot of the landowners have memory of that and they don't want to have paper leases because there's a fear that if the government decides to do land reform and land redistribution again, if there's a paper lease proving that somebody else is farming the land, that they'll get the land instead of them. So a lot of most leased land is just on like handshake agreements. So there's no paper trail. Um, I don't know, Kellee or Lee, do you have anything you want to share about friendly farming in the US? No. Okay. Jennifer is wondering, as we plan the next delegation trip to Taiwan, which aspect of the trip will remain the same and be different? In other words, can you share a bit more about the vision and purpose you have for the second trip?
Yeah, well, we're still kind of in the stages of like thinking through that, but I think there were certain things that, like as we went through like, we, talked to delegates about like their experience, like things they liked, things they didn't like. I think we all agree that like we really wanted some more like hands-on like farming while we were there. And I think the difficult part about that was like I said, like not having deep enough relationships with the farmers to be like, hey, just invite all these people you don't know like onto your farm to work for an afternoon. But I think that now that we've like kind of established that, we want to like kind of go deeper with some of the topics and like even, like getting the opportunity to talk to people about their soil, how do they care for the soil? Like, how do they cover crop or do they? All of those like kind of like finer details, I think we didn't really necessarily have like the space or time on this trip to do that. So I think we would definitely want to try to organize it in a way to get that kind of like deeper knowledge. And then, I mean, we've even talked about like going to other parts of Taiwan. Like we kind of scheduled this, during like a good time for US-based farmers to travel, which is like still winter time in Taiwan. And so, we're like maybe next year when we go, we could either try to visit like a different region that still has like a lot of production happening. Because this year we kind of like we're focusing on grains, and not so much vegetables, which I think many of us are vegetable farmers. And so that was another thing that we wanted to like do differently next time. I don't know if you want to add anything, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, there's like we've talked about like 7,000 different ways that a trip like this could look. I mean, we're like we could just go to one place for like 2 weeks, or we're like actually we didn't even go to the West Coast. Like maybe we need to be moving more. But this first trip was very like just throw it at the wall and let's see. And that's why we took people that we kind of had trusting relationships with too to get feedback of like what was valuable, what wasn't. But as Lee showed that map of Taiwan, actually so much of the agriculture is on the West Coast, and we really focused on the East Coast. And that's for a few reasons, which is one, that's where Lee and Peru had a lot of their relationships with, and we really wanted to make sure that we were working with people that had worked with Peru, had worked with Lee, and that we knew and had that kind of trust built. And also similarly, a lot of even though the east coast of Taiwan is much less agricultural, that's kind of where like the hotbeds of like alternative and like different forms of agriculture are. There's a lot of indigenous agriculture on the east coast as well. So kind of getting out of the like main hub of like the more conventional agriculture is where we're able to find people who are able to do some more innovative and agroecological projects. But that being said, we are trying in part of our like strategic planning, which we're in right now, wanting to make sure that we're also spending more time outside of just this like very intensive trip where we're like running around in a van going from spot A to spot B to like spend more time in Taiwan, meet more people, meet people on the West Coast, find the people that are and build relationships with the people that are doing agroecology in other areas before we just show up with like a bus of people. So yeah, making sure that we're spending more time in Taiwan meeting people on the ground before just like showing up at their door. For future delegations, do you know if you would be open to folks who work in food adjacent roles? How do you envision hosting Taiwanese farmers in the US? I really enjoyed your presentation. Lee, do you want to talk to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also something that we've definitely thought about, and especially because Scott and I also have these other roles within the food system, like as researchers and also just, like working in different capacities. So I think I can definitely see a way that, I would like personally love to create more opportunities for like um every level of the food system to like be engaged in kind of this intentional like international community building because I kind of touched on it earlier, but because Taiwan's agriculture is small scale for the most part, that means like the distribution is small scale, the packaging is small scale. There's a lot, like the way that they interact with consumers, I feel like is so in line with kind of like what small scale agriculture in California also is doing, that I just feel like there's so much to learn. Um, and then in bringing farmers from Taiwan to the US, I think obviously like starting from like the farm perspective, but also yeah, I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I think we've heard from the farmers that we visited that they would be really excited by that opportunity.
Yeah, one thing that like I mean we all have there's three organizers and I think we all have a million different ideas. I would love to see bringing like policymakers as well to learn to kind of dive a little bit deeper into um, especially like how the subsidies work. There's a lot of all of the farmers that we talked to mentioned that the subsidies were super. I mean these are small farmers like some of them are farming just like a few acres or hectares. And they receive subsidies that make it possible, and that's just something that you don't see here in the same way. I know there's like a bunch of different things, yeah, different beginning farmer training programs. There's a lot of the similar problems that U.S. farmers face: aging farmer populations, like resource competition, um, and I think that could be a really interesting trip as well. And then I would love to see, when farmers come here, like being able to like host some sort of like an event or, like an encuentro style, like conference, meeting where folks can come to and we can really have like more of these like deeper discussions and talk about like what does international solidarity look like. Um, yeah. Kellee, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on to any of this.
I I I too would be really excited to see farmers from Taiwan visit, our area and our regions. I think there's so much that we can learn from them. Even like if they were to be visiting our farms, I think that there's just so much yeah, so much curiosity in the way that we do things, the way things are set up and how things are similar and different. I'm really excited for that piece to be able to see if farmers from other places can come here.
Well, I think we have 1 minute left. Is there like a really short question in the chat?
Just people saying that'd be cool. Yeah, I think we got to all the questions. Um, well, if people have other questions, feel free to contact us also and through Instagram, like we mentioned up here, Taiwan Food and Farm Tour. Yeah,
Yeah, you can email us on our personal emails. But thank you so much for being here, and thanks, CAF, for hosting us.
Thank you all so much. That was wonderful. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed today's workshop. We hope to check you out at the next workshop here at the California Small Farm Conference. Huge thanks to our presenters, our attendees, and everyone who's made this possible. And happy farming, everybody.